So earlier this year, I started with a multiplayer game jam, and that got me into thinking a lot about small multiplayer games, arena games, and these tiny pressure worlds where everything depends on one simple loop working really well. And that's when I started realizing something. IO games are underrated. They're often treated like cheap browser games or simple clones, but from a game design perspective, they're actually very pure. They're loop first games, and that makes them incredibly useful for learning game development. Because when you build an IO game, you have to answer the real question: what does the player do over and over again, and why would they want to keep doing that? Some games can start with visuals. You find the mood first, the character, the world, the atmosphere. And for horror games, story games, or emotional games, that can work really well because the visual identity is part of the experience. They shape how the player feels before the mechanics even do anything. But IO games are different. With IO games, you can start with almost nothing. You can start with a few basic shapes on a blank screen. Maybe it's just a player, a tiny arena, and something to chase. And if that simple version already creates tension, then the game is starting to work. That's what makes them so powerful for learning. You can test the actual heartbeat of the game before you spend months making art, lore, systems, menus, and content. You can ask, is this fun with almost nothing? Because if it is, then you probably have something real, and if it isn't, better visuals probably won't save it. A lot of game developers talk about finding the 5 minutes of fun. It's a small slice of gameplay that proves the game actually works. You trying to find the repeatable piece that makes someone want to keep playing. IO games are almost entirely built around that idea. They're basically 5 minutes of fun stretched into a full game. That sounds simple, but it teaches a huge lesson. A game loop doesn't need to be massive to be powerful. It needs to be clear, it needs to create pressure, and it needs to make the player want to try again. Most IO games share the same design DNA. They usually have instant entry, a shared arena, one simple core action, visible progress, and a fast reset. You don't spend 20 minutes creating a character or reading lore. You just appear in the world and start playing. And the other players are not just background noise. They're part of the pressure system. The core action is usually simple: eat, push, shoot, collect, survive, grow, and the progress is visible. You can see yourself getting bigger, stronger, faster, more dangerous, or more capable. Then when you lose, it doesn't feel like the whole night is ruined. You just do it again. That combination is incredibly useful for learning game design because every part of the game is connected to the loop. There's very little waste. Everything either supports the loop or exposes that the loop is weak. In an IO game, there's nowhere for the loop to hide. There's no giant world to hide behind, no cinematic story carrying the experience for you, no endless progression system making the players stay even though the actual gameplay is boring. The moment to moment loop has to stand on its own. The container is small, so the loop has to carry almost everything. That's scary as a developer, but it's also useful because it forces you to face the truth of the design. Is moving around fun? Is collecting satisfying? Can the player read danger clearly? Does growth feel exciting? Those questions are the foundation of game design, and IO games put those questions right in front of you. One of the biggest things IO games teach is that the environment itself can teach the player. The best IO games don't need to explain themselves very much. You spawn in, and the world immediately starts telling you what matters. That's one of the strongest lessons you can learn as a game developer. A loop becomes stronger when the world itself teaches the player what to do. The world teaches through the way it's arranged, where the resources are placed, how other players move, where the danger gathers, and how the arena pulls you towards risk. The player starts learning before the game ever has to explain itself. They should be able to look at the screen and feel the question immediately. That's the loop speaking through the world. A great loop doesn't feel like a random collection of mechanics. It feels like the natural result of the world you built. That's the strange thing. When the loop is strong, it starts to feel inevitable. Once the loop is working, the behaviors start to feel obvious. Small players naturally search for safe growth. Big players naturally become threats. The center of the map naturally becomes dangerous. And when someone dies, their resources spill back into the world, giving everyone nearby a reason to move, fight, or take a risk. That's when you know you're onto something. The loop stops to feel like something you forced into the game, and it starts feeling like something the world naturally produces. And that's what building IO games teaches you. A good loop is not just an action the player repeats, it's a little machine the world keeps generating. This is why I think IO games are a great place to start for game developers, not because they're easy. Multiplayer can actually be hard. Networking, servers, syncing players, handling latency, and all of that can become complicated. But from a design perspective, IO games are simple in the right way. They teach you to ask better questions. Instead of asking, how big can I make this game? You start asking, what is the player doing every second? Instead of asking, how many features can I add? You ask, does this feature make the loop stronger? And instead of asking, how do I make players stay forever? You ask, why would they want to for one more round? That shift matters because a lot of beginner developers accidentally build outward before they build inward. They add menus, inventory systems, crafting, lore, quests, items, cosmetics, complicated controls, but the center is still weak. The loop isn't alive yet. IO games force you to build the center first, and once the center works, everything else has somewhere to attach. That's why I keep coming back to small games, small arenas, small worlds, small loops, because small doesn't mean shallow. Sometimes small containers reveal the deepest systems. An IO game might look like circles chasing circles, but underneath that, there's pressure, risk, movement, greed, fear, timing, territory, survival. There's the feeling of being small in a dangerous world, then slowly becoming the thing other players run from. And you don't need 1,000 mechanics to create that. You need one clear loop that creates pressure by itself. Build a tiny arena, use basic shapes, give the player one action and one source of growth and one source of danger. Make death fast, make restarting easy, then watch what happens. Because that little experiment will teach you more about game loops than a giant unfinished project with 10 systems stacked on top of each other. IO games strip game design down to the core. They ask one brutal question: is the loop fun? And if the answer is no, there's nowhere to hide. And if the answer is yes, then even a tiny world can become something players want to return to again and again. Because the smallest worlds hide the deepest systems. And IO games prove that better than almost anything.